What she didn't know was that while she was humiliating me in that moment, I was already planning how to turn their perfect fairy tale wedding into a nightmare they would never forget. My name is Margaret Stone. I'm 70 years old. 3 hours ago, I watched my only son David marry the most vindictive, manipulative woman I've ever encountered. The confrontation happened at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Country Club. 200 guests witnessed what happened next. Most of them had known me for decades. They saw everything. Masam kapi bai wasav. The morning had started beautifully. I arrived early at the venue. I wore an elegant navy dress I'd spent weeks selecting. Something that would photograph well. Something that wouldn't overshadow the bride. I'd followed every rule of wedding etiquette. I stayed out of the planning process when Vanessa made it clear my input wasn't welcome. I smiled politely through months of passive-aggressive comments about my outdated ideas. I thought I was being the perfect mother-in-law, supportive but not intrusive, present but not overwhelming. I was spectacularly wrong. Cation. Let me paint you a picture of how this disaster unfolded, because what happened next revealed the true character of the woman my son had chosen to marry. And it revealed something even more devastating about my son himself. The Riverside Country Club is one of the most prestigious venues in all of Connecticut. Established in 1925, it sits on 40 acres of perfectly manicured grounds overlooking the Connecticut River. The Grand Ballroom can accommodate up to 300 guests. Crystal chandeliers hang from 20-foot ceilings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer breathtaking views of the river and surrounding hills. It's the kind of place where Connecticut's elite families have celebrated their most important milestones for nearly a century. Weddings, anniversary parties, charity galas. The membership waiting list is 5 years long. The venue booking list extends 2 years in advance. David and Vanessa had secured this location only because of my connections. As the former principal of Riverside Academy, Connecticut's most prestigious private high school, I'd built relationships with influential families over 3 decades. Families whose children I'd guided through their academic careers. Families who respected my judgment and valued my friendship. When David told me he wanted to propose to Vanessa, I'd made a phone call. One conversation with Harrison Whitfield III, whose son had graduated from Riverside Academy 5 years earlier, secured the Grand Ballroom for David's wedding. The same venue that typically required connections, references, and a waiting list that stretched beyond reasonable planning horizons. "Mrs. Stone," Harrison had said over the phone, "after everything you did for Timothy during his challenging years, booking the club for your son's wedding is the least I can do. Consider it handled." That phone call saved David and Vanessa approximately $15,000. The difference between what they would have paid at a comparable venue and the discounted rate I'd negotiated through my relationships. Vanessa never thanked me for that favor. She never acknowledged that her dream wedding venue was secured through my efforts. In fact, she seemed to resent my involvement entirely. I wish David's mother wasn't so involved, I overheard her saying to her sister during wedding planning. It's like she thinks this is her wedding instead of mine. I'd arranged the venue. That was the extent of my involvement. Everything else had been Vanessa's choices, Vanessa's decisions, Vanessa's vision. But apparently, even that minimal contribution was too much involvement for the bride-to-be. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at the country club at 11 a.m. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m., followed by cocktails and dinner. I came early because I wanted to check that the flowers I'd contributed had been properly arranged. Yes, I'd also contributed to the floral arrangements, another gesture that Vanessa had never acknowledged. When David mentioned that their floral budget was stretched thin, I'd quietly contacted my friend, Sarah Matthews. Sarah owns Riverside Gardens, the premier florist in our area. For 30 years, Sarah had provided flowers for every school event I'd organized at Riverside Academy. Graduation ceremonies, fundraising galas, academic award dinners. For Thora Gravide, the people prasad of 20 nights, grasad of 20 nights, Matharade stopolos, Bivadasin sadiv doprevene, grasad of 20 nights, giving or 20 nights, grasad 20 ites igand. Margaret, Sarah had said when I explained the situation, I'll create something beautiful for David's wedding. Don't worry about the cost. Consider it my gift to you and your family." Sarah had designed and donated centerpieces for all 20 tables. Arrangements that would have cost $3,000 at retail prices. Beautiful white roses, peonies, and greenery that perfectly complemented Vanessa's chosen color scheme. Again, Vanessa never thanked me. She examined the centerpieces when they were delivered and made a small comment about preferring a different style. But she accepted them because the alternative was empty tables or arrangements they couldn't afford. So when I arrived that morning, I wanted to see Sarah's beautiful work in place. I wanted to feel proud of the small ways I'd contributed to making this day special for my son. The ballroom looked magnificent. Round tables dressed in ivory linens. Crystal stemware catching the morning light from those floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah's floral arrangements providing elegant focal points without overwhelming the space. Everything was perfect. "Mrs. Stone?" A young woman in a black suit approached me. She carried a clipboard and wore a headset. Obviously the wedding coordinator. "Yes," I said. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Elegant Events. I'm coordinating today's celebration." She consulted her clipboard. "You're listed as the groom's mother, correct?" "That's right," I said. "Perfect. I wanted to review the timeline with family members. The bridal party will arrive for photos at 1 p.m. Family photos are scheduled from 2 to 3 p.m. Guests begin arriving at 3:30 for the 4 p.m. ceremony." Jennifer was thorough and professional. She walked me through where family members should be during different parts of the day, where to sit during the ceremony, where to stand during the receiving line, where to be positioned for family photos. "The bride has been very specific about photo arrangements," Jennifer said, consulting her notes. "She's provided a detailed list of who should be included in which groupings." This seemed reasonable. Weddings require coordination. Someone has to organize the logistics. "Is there anything specific I should know about my role today?" I asked. Jennifer hesitated slightly. The bride mentioned that she prefers family members to keep a lower profile during the reception. She wants the focus to remain on the couple rather than extended family mingling. Lower profile. That was an interesting way to phrase it. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "Just that family members might want to limit their table visits during dinner. Let the couple make the rounds to greet guests rather than family members doing their own circulation." This struck me as unusual. At every wedding I'd attended, family members naturally mingled with guests. Parents introduced themselves to people they hadn't met. They shared stories about the bride and groom. They helped create a warm, welcoming atmosphere for everyone. But if that's what Vanessa preferred, I could respect her wishes. "Of course," I told Jennifer. "I'll follow whatever guidelines the bride has established." "Wonderful," Jennifer said. "I think today is going to be absolutely beautiful." She was right about that. The day was beautiful. Sunny but not too warm. A gentle breeze from the river. Perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony they'd planned on the club's terrace. I spent the next few hours helping with small tasks. Directing vendors who had questions about setup. Greeting early arrivals who knew me from my years at Riverside Academy. Making sure everything ran smoothly so David and Vanessa could focus on enjoying their day. At 1 p.m., the bridal party arrived for photos. Vanessa looked stunning in her wedding dress, an intricate beaded gown with a cathedral train, the kind of dress every bride dreams of wearing. She'd found it at a boutique in New York City. The price tag was $8,000. I knew because I'd helped pay for it. When David mentioned that the dress budget was causing stress, I'd quietly contributed $3,000, not as a loan, but as a gift. I wanted Vanessa to have the dress she loved. I wanted my son's wedding day to be perfect. "Mom," David had said when I made the offer, "you don't have to do that." "I want to," I'd replied. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime day. Vanessa should have the dress that makes her feel beautiful." David had hugged me. "Thank you, Mom, this means everything to Vanessa." But Vanessa's thank you had been brief and awkward. "That's very generous, Mrs. Stone. no emotion. No gratitude. Like I'd offered to pay for her coffee rather than contribute to the most important dress she'd ever wear. Watching her pose for photos in that dress, I felt proud of my contribution. She looked radiant. The dress fit perfectly. She was going to have beautiful wedding photos that captured this magical day. The photographer worked efficiently with the bridal party. Vanessa was clearly comfortable being the center of attention. She posed naturally, directed others into position, and seemed to enjoy every moment of the photo session. This was her day. She deserved to feel like a princess. Leah. At 2 p.m., family photos began. This was when I first noticed the tension. Okay, the photographer announced. Let's do some family groupings. Parents with the couple first. Vanessa's parents stepped forward immediately. Her father, Robert Chen, was a successful surgeon. Her mother, Linda, was a retired college professor. They were lovely people who'd always been polite to me, though we'd never developed a close relationship. I stepped forward to join the photo. The photographer positioned us around David and Vanessa. David on the left, Vanessa on the right. Her parents flanking Vanessa, me standing beside David. Actually, Vanessa said, could we do my parents alone with us first? Then we'll add David's mother afterward. This seemed odd. Most wedding photographers start with both sets of parents together, then do individual family groupings. But maybe Vanessa had a specific vision for her album. I stepped back and waited while the photographer took several shots of David, Vanessa, and the Chens. Beautiful, the photographer said. Now let's add Mom Stone. I moved back into position beside David. The photographer took a few more shots. Perfect, he said. Now let's do some extended family groupings. But Vanessa interrupted again. Actually, I think we have enough photos with David's family. Let's move on to my relatives. Enough photos? We'd taken maybe 6 shots with me in them. At most weddings, family photos include dozens of different combinations. Grandparents, siblings, aunts, and uncles. Cousins. Multiple generations celebrating together. Vanessa, David said quietly, don't you want some photos with my aunts and uncles? They came all the way from California. We can take a few quick shots later if there's time, Vanessa replied. Right now, I want to focus on my family while everyone looks fresh. My family, not our family. Not the families coming together through this marriage. Her family. I watched as Vanessa posed with her siblings, her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, her cousins. The photographer spent 45 minutes capturing every possible combination of her relatives. David stood patiently beside her through each grouping, but his family remained off to the side, waiting for their turn that never came. We're running behind schedule, Vanessa announced when her family photos were finished. I think we need to move on to individual bridal portraits. No extended photos with David's family. No pictures of both families together celebrating the union of their children. No acknowledgement that this wedding represented the joining of 2 families, not just the celebration of one. So Shalom Man. I felt the first stirring of unease. This wasn't about photography schedules or time constraints. This was about hierarchy. About whose family mattered and whose family was an afterthought. But I pushed those concerns aside. Maybe Vanessa was feeling stressed. Maybe the wedding timeline was tighter than I realized. Maybe there would be opportunities for more family photos later. I'll be questioned. I was trying to be understanding, to give her the benefit of the doubt. That generosity was about to backfire spectacularly. At 3:30 p.m., guests began arriving for the ceremony. I positioned myself near the entrance to greet people as Jennifer had instructed. Not to direct or control anything, just to be welcoming and helpful. Many of the guests were people I'd known for years. Parents of David's childhood friends. Colleagues from Riverside Academy. Neighbors from our community. They were excited to see me, eager to share in this celebration. And there's why. Margaret, called Susan Richardson, whose son had been David's best friend throughout high school. You must be so proud today. David looks incredibly happy. I am proud, I replied honestly. It's wonderful to see him starting this new chapter. And Vanessa seems lovely, Susan continued. Have you gotten to know her well? This was a delicate question. The honest answer was no, I hadn't gotten to know Vanessa well. Despite dating David for 2 years and being engaged for 8 months, she'd remained somewhat distant from his family, polite but not warm, present but not engaged. She makes David happy, I said diplomatically. That's what matters most. Similar conversations happened with a dozen other guests. People asking about Vanessa, about the wedding planning, about how I felt about gaining a daughter-in-law. I kept my responses positive and general. This wasn't the time or place for complicated family dynamics. This was David's wedding day. Whatever challenges existed between Vanessa and me could be addressed later. Or so I thought. Qua bo ixis. The ceremony itself was beautiful. David and Vanessa had written their own vows. They spoke about partnership, adventure, and building a life together. David looked handsome in his tuxedo. Vanessa was radiant in her dress. Bae. I cried during the vows. Happy tears, watching my son promise to love and cherish the woman he'd chosen to marry. Whatever reservations I had about Vanessa, I wanted this marriage to succeed. I wanted David to be happy. Faki tours. After the ceremony, guests moved to the terrace for cocktails. This was the social hour before dinner. Time for mingling, congratulations and celebration. I grabbed a glass of champagne and began circulating among the guests. Not aggressively, not trying to be the center of attention. Just being social, as anyone would at a wedding. Mrs. Stone, called Harold Martinez, whose daughter had graduated from Riverside Academy 3 years earlier. Congratulations on David's wedding. This venue is absolutely spectacular. Thank you, Harold, I said. It really is a beautiful setting. How did they manage to book the Riverside Country Club? Harold asked. I heard the waiting list is impossible. This was a perfectly natural question. The club's exclusivity was well known in our community. I was able to help with that, I said simply. Some connections from my years at the academy. That's wonderful, Harold said. What a gift to be able to help your son secure such a perfect venue. A gift, that's exactly what it was. A gift that had saved David and Vanessa thousands of dollars and given them access to a venue they couldn't have booked otherwise. But apparently, discussing this gift publicly was about to become a problem. I continued mingling, having similar conversations with other guests. People asked about the venue, the flowers, how the wedding planning had gone. I answered honestly but briefly, always redirecting attention back to David and Vanessa. Margaret, said Carol Williams, a longtime friend and colleague, I have to ask about those gorgeous centerpieces. They're absolutely stunning. Aren't they beautiful? I agreed. Sarah Matthews created them. She's incredibly talented. Sarah did them? Carol asked. They must have cost a fortune. They look like something from a magazine. Sarah was very generous, I said, not elaborating on the details. These were normal wedding conversations. Guests naturally ask about vendors, costs, and logistics. I wasn't volunteering inappropriate information or trying to take credit for things. I was simply answering questions honestly when people asked. But I was being watched. Bye. Vanessa had noticed my conversations with guests. She'd seen people complimenting the venue and flowers, and she'd heard my responses acknowledging my contributions to securing both. In her mind, I was apparently taking credit for her wedding, stealing her spotlight, making myself the center of attention on her special day. Nothing could have been further from my intentions. But Vanessa had already decided I was the problem. At 5 p.m. during the height of the cocktail hour, she approached me. I was standing near the terrace railing, talking with 3 couples I'd known for years. We were discussing the beautiful river view and how perfect the weather had turned out for an outdoor ceremony. Mrs. Stone, Vanessa said, appearing beside our conversation group. Her voice had that fake sweetness I'd learned to recognize over the past year. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Of course," I said, excusing myself from the conversation. Vanessa led me toward a quieter area near the kitchen entrance, away from the main party but not completely isolated. Several other guests were within earshot, including some of David's groomsmen who were standing nearby. "I need to address something," Vanessa said, her tone completely different now that we were away from the main group. "What's wrong?" I asked, genuinely concerned that there might be some problem with the wedding logistics. "You're embarrassing yourself," Vanessa said bluntly. "And you're embarrassing David." I stared at her, completely confused. "I'm sorry? What do you mean?" "All this attention-seeking behavior," she continued. "Acting like you're the hostess instead of just a guest. Talking to my guests like this is your event. Her guests. Not our guests. Not David's guests. Her guests." "Vanessa," I said carefully, "I'm just greeting people I've known for years. I haven't done anything inappropriate." "You're taking credit for everything," she snapped. "The venue, the flowers, acting like you planned this wedding instead of me." This was completely untrue. I'd answered questions when people asked, but I'd never claimed credit for planning anything. "I only mentioned my involvement when people specifically asked," I said. "And only because they were direct questions about things I actually did help with." "That's exactly the problem," Vanessa said, her voice rising slightly. "You helped with things you shouldn't have helped with. You inserted yourself into wedding planning that should have been private between David and me." "Inserted myself? By arranging the venue when David asked for help? By contributing to costs when they exceeded their budget?" "Vanessa, David asked for my help with those things," I said. "I was responding to requests, not volunteering unwanted assistance." "That doesn't matter," she replied. "What matters is that you're making this about you instead of about us. And I want it to stop." Several people had definitely heard her raised voice by now. I could see concerned expressions on faces nearby. This was turning into exactly the kind of scene that ruins wedding celebrations. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, trying to lower the temperature of our conversation. "I'm not trying to make anything about me. I just want David to have a beautiful wedding day." "Then you'll leave," Vanessa said without hesitation. The words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm sorry?" I said, certain I'd misheard. "You heard me," Vanessa said, louder now. "Leave. Get out of my wedding. You're not wanted here, and you're ruining everything with your desperate need for attention." The cruelty in her voice was stunning. But even more stunning was the fact that we now had an audience. David's groomsmen had stopped their conversation and were staring. Other guests had turned to look. Some were already pulling out phones. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "you should reconsider what you're saying. This is your wedding day. You don't want this kind of scene." "I've considered it plenty," she said, even louder. "Either you leave voluntarily, or I'll have security escort you out. Your choice." Security escort. She was threatening to have me physically removed from my own son's wedding. That's when David appeared. He'd obviously been alerted that something was happening between his mother and his bride. "Ahahua, Amélie," my heart lifted for a moment. Surely my son would intervene. Surely he would tell his new wife that she was completely out of line. That threatening to have his mother removed from his wedding was unacceptable under any circumstances. Instead, David looked at me with a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. "Mom," he said quietly, "what's going on here? What's going on?" As if I was the one creating problems. "David," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "Vanessa has asked me to leave your wedding. I honestly don't understand why." David looked between his mother and his new wife. I could see him calculating, weighing options, deciding whose side to take. "Mom," he said finally, "maybe it would be better if you just went home. Vanessa's stressed about everything being perfect, and we don't want any drama today." Any drama. As if his mother being publicly humiliated and threatened with removal wasn't drama that his wife had created. "David," I said, my voice breaking slightly, "I haven't done anything wrong. I've been nothing but supportive and respectful." "I know, Mom," David said, but his tone suggested he was just trying to manage the situation rather than defend me. "But you know how important this day is to Vanessa. Can't you just let this go?" Let this go. Let his wife's public disrespect and threats go. Accept humiliation gracefully to avoid inconveniencing the bride. "Please, Mom," David continued, glancing nervously at Vanessa. "Just for today. We can talk about this later." And that's when I understood the truth. This wasn't about my behavior or my conversations with guests. This wasn't about attention-seeking or inappropriate involvement. This was about power. Vanessa was establishing the hierarchy for this new family, making it clear that my opinions, my feelings, and my presence were all subject to her approval. And David was choosing her side. The son I had raised alone after his father died. The boy I'd worked 3 jobs to support through private school and college. The young man I'd helped establish in his career and supported through every challenge. He was choosing his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity. "Fine," I said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear clearly. "I'll leave your wedding, Vanessa." I looked directly at my son. "But David, understand this. Today you're choosing who matters in your life. You're choosing whose respect you value and whose feelings you'll protect." I turned back to Vanessa. "And you should understand that every action has consequences. Some consequences last much longer than one perfect wedding day." I walked toward the exit with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations starting. Guests trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The mother of the groom being ordered to leave her own son's wedding. In the lobby of the country club, I could still hear the celebration continuing. Music from the reception, laughter and conversation. The clinking of champagne glasses as guests toasted the happy couple. But Vanessa had made a critical miscalculation. She thought she was dealing with a weak old woman who would slink away quietly and accept humiliation. Someone who would be grateful for whatever scraps of respect the new family hierarchy offered. She thought I would go home, cry privately, and eventually apologize for causing problems on her special day. She was about to discover that Margaret Stone was not that kind of woman. I had built a life of respect and influence over 70 years. I'd raised a son who'd apparently forgotten where his opportunities came from. I'd contributed significantly to this wedding that was now rejecting me. And I was about to remind everyone, especially David and Vanessa, exactly what happened when you humiliated the wrong person. The woman walking out of that country club was not the same woman who'd walked in that morning. She was someone who just learned that love and respect were not guaranteed, even from your own children. But she was also someone who knew exactly how to fight back when diplomacy failed. This is the story of how my son's bride thought she could publicly humiliate me and destroy my reputation in front of everyone I'd known for decades. Twara Kwendak. She was spectacularly wrong. To understand how devastating Vanessa's betrayal truly was, you need to know who I am. You need to understand the woman she humiliated wasn't some helpless old lady with nothing to lose. I am Margaret Stone. For 30 years, I was the principal of Riverside Academy, the most prestigious private school in Connecticut. I didn't just work there. I built that institution into what it became. When I started at Riverside Academy in 1993, it was a struggling private school with declining enrollment and a reputation for mediocrity. When I retired last year, it was the most sought-after educational institution in the state, with a waiting list of over 400 students and an endowment of $50 million. I transformed that school through 3 decades of relentless dedication, 16-hour days, weekend events, holiday fundraisers. I gave everything I had to create something extraordinary. But more than that, I shaped the lives of over 2,000 students during my tenure. Future doctors, lawyers, business leaders, politicians, children from Connecticut's most influential families, young people who still call me to share their successes and ask for advice. I didn't just educate them, I mentored them, guided them through academic challenges, family crises, and personal struggles. I was often the adult they trusted most during their formative years. Then, these weren't just students. They became my extended family. A network of accomplished adults who respected my judgment and valued my friendship. Harrison Whitfield III, who secured David's wedding venue, was one of them. Timothy had struggled with learning disabilities throughout elementary school. Other schools had written him off as lazy or unfocused. Chabazas, I saw his potential. I developed an individualized learning plan. I connected him with specialized tutors. I advocated for accommodations that allowed him to succeed. Hapiazeta. Timothy graduated from Riverside Academy with honors. He went on to graduate from Yale University. Today he runs his family's investment firm and manages over $200 million in assets. Mrs. Stone, Timothy told me at his college graduation, you saved my academic career. You saw something in me that no one else could see. That's what I did for 30 years. I saw potential where others saw problems. I created opportunities where others saw obstacles. Numspilosestros Mrs. Satcher, Numspikin Matthews, my florist friend, was another former student. Sarah had been a quiet, artistic girl whose parents wanted her to pursue pre-med studies. Sarah hated science but felt trapped by family expectations. I encouraged her to explore her artistic talents. I helped her apply to design programs her parents had never considered. I spent hours helping her build a portfolio for art school applications. Sarah graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design. She returned to Connecticut and built Riverside Gardens into the most successful floral design business in the region. Her client list includes celebrities, politicians, and Fortune 500 executives. Mrs. Stone, Sarah said when she donated those wedding flowers, you taught me to follow my passion instead of other people's expectations. Everything I've achieved started with your encouragement. This is who I am. Someone who spent 3 decades investing in other people's success. Someone who built a reputation based on integrity, dedication, and results. But my professional achievements were only part of what I'd created over 70 years. I'd also built something even more important. A life of respect, influence, and meaningful relationships. Taosavani, let me tell you where I came from, so you understand exactly what it meant to achieve everything Vanessa was now trying to destroy. I was born in 1953 in Hartford, Connecticut. My parents, Robert and Helen Stone, were working-class people who never owned their own home. My father worked as a mechanic at a local garage. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in West Hartford. We lived in a small apartment above a bakery on Franklin Avenue. 3 rooms for 4 people. My younger brother Michael and I shared a bedroom that was barely large enough for bunk beds and a single dresser. Money was always tight. My parents worked constantly but never seemed to get ahead. Every month brought new worries about rent, utilities, or unexpected expenses. Margaret, my mother would tell me as she prepared for another day of cleaning other people's houses, education is the only way out of this life. You're smart enough to go to college. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Helen Stone had been forced to drop out of high school when her own mother became ill. She'd spent her teenage years caring for siblings and helping support her family. By the time circumstances allowed her to think about her own education, it was too late. She was determined that her children would have the opportunities she'd missed. My parents couldn't afford private school tuition or college savings accounts, but they could provide something equally valuable: unwavering support for academic achievement and the expectation that education would be my pathway to a better life. I excelled in school from an early age, not because learning came easily, but because I understood the stakes. Every grade, every test, every assignment was a step toward the future my mother envisioned. Hartford Public High School in the 1960s was overcrowded and under-resourced. Many of my classmates dropped out before graduation. Those who stayed often had low expectations for their futures. But I had Mrs. Patricia Williams, my sophomore English teacher, who recognized my potential and refused to let me settle for mediocrity. Margaret, Mrs. Williams told me after class one day, you have the intelligence and work ethic to attend any college in the country, but you need to start planning now. Mrs. Williams spent her own time helping me research scholarship opportunities. She guided me through college application processes that my parents didn't understand. She wrote recommendation letters that opened doors I didn't even know existed. This girl will succeed at whatever she attempts, Mrs. Williams wrote in her letter to Connecticut College. She has the rare combination of intellectual ability and moral character that produces exceptional leaders. That letter helped secure a full academic scholarship to Connecticut College, 4 years of tuition, room, and board. the opportunity to escape the cycle of financial struggle that had defined my childhood. When I received the acceptance letter with the scholarship offer, my mother cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride and relief. "You did it," she whispered, holding the letter like it was made of gold. "You're going to have the life I always dreamed of." Connecticut College in the early 1970s was a world I'd never experienced. Students from wealthy families who took their advantages for granted. Young women whose biggest concern was choosing between multiple opportunities rather than figuring out how to create any opportunities at all. I felt like an imposter for the first semester. My clothes were wrong, my experiences were limited, my cultural references were different from my classmates. But I had something many of them lacked: the hunger that comes from understanding exactly what failure meant. The drive that develops when success isn't guaranteed or inherited. I studied harder than anyone else. I participated in every academic opportunity. I sought out professors who could mentor me and help me develop professionally. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, my education professor, became my most important mentor. Dr. Harper had built her career studying educational leadership and institutional development. "Margaret," she told me during my senior year, "you have the vision and determination to transform educational institutions. You should consider pursuing graduate study in educational administration." Graduate school meant more years of financial sacrifice, more delayed gratification while my classmates started their careers and adult lives. But Dr. Harper helped me secure a graduate assistantship at the University of Connecticut, a position that covered tuition while providing valuable experience in educational administration. "You're investing in your future," Dr. Harper said when I expressed concerns about spending 2 more years in school. The best educational leaders combine classroom experience with advanced training in administration and policy. I earned my master's degree in educational administration in 1975. But more importantly, I gained practical experience managing academic programs and working with diverse student populations. My first job was as a middle school assistant principal in New Haven. The school served a predominantly low-income student population. Many of the challenges I encountered reminded me of my own childhood experiences, with limited resources and low expectations. "These kids are capable of so much more than anyone expects," I told my principal, James Morrison, during my first year. "That's idealistic thinking, Margaret," James replied. "We have to be realistic about what these students can achieve given their backgrounds." Realistic. That's what people always said when they wanted to justify low expectations and poor results. Or any Beckles and Sile any back to we have to be vex. Be a egg smile sucks. Or a bore you ninnels. I spent 3 years in New Haven proving that realistic expectations were usually just excuses for inadequate leadership. I developed tutoring programs, created enrichment opportunities, and established partnerships with local businesses and colleges. Test scores improved. College enrollment increased. Behavioral problems decreased. But I wanted to do more than improve an existing program. I wanted to build something exceptional from the ground up. That opportunity came in 1978 when I was offered the position of assistant principal at Riverside Academy in Connecticut. The school was struggling with declining enrollment and financial difficulties. "We need someone who can help us develop a long-term strategic plan," the board chairman told me during my interview. "Someone with fresh ideas about how to compete with larger institutions." Riverside Academy had potential but lacked vision. Beautiful campus. Small class sizes. Dedicated faculty. But no clear identity or compelling reason for families to choose it over other options. Nana Hawadale Klamonamai. I spent my first year studying everything about the school. Academic programs, financial operations, community relationships. I identified strengths to build on and weaknesses to address. "We need to become the school that develops tomorrow's leaders," I proposed to the board during my strategic planning presentation. Not just academically, but ethically and socially. The board was intrigued but cautious. Transformation requires investment, risk, change that might alienate existing families while attracting new ones. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked board member Caroline Westbrook. "A comprehensive leadership development program integrated into every aspect of student life," I explained. "Academic excellence combined with character education, community service, and real-world problem-solving experience. I outlined my vision in detail. Advanced placement courses taught by master teachers. Internship programs with local businesses and organizations. Community service requirements that connected students with local needs. "This sounds expensive," observed another board member. "This sounds necessary," I replied. "We can either invest in becoming exceptional, or we can continue declining toward irrelevance." The board approved my proposal. But approving a plan and implementing it successfully are very different challenges. I spent the next 5 years building the infrastructure for transformation, recruiting outstanding faculty, developing curriculum innovations, creating partnerships with universities and employers. Mullimer shock. The work was exhausting, but exhilarating. 18-hour days during the school year. Summers spent planning, fundraising, and professional development. But the results spoke for themselves. Applications increased. Test scores improved. College placement rates reached 100%. Alumni began making significant donations to support further expansion. In 1985, the principal position became available. The board offered it to me without hesitation. "Margaret," Caroline Westbrook said during the offer meeting, "you've already transformed this school as assistant principal. As principal, you can take us to heights we never imagined." Heights we never imagined. That became my mission for the next 38 years. As principal, I had the authority to implement my vision completely. Academic excellence wasn't enough. I wanted to develop young people who would make positive differences in whatever fields they chose. Epilogue. I expanded the community service program. Every student completed 100 hours of volunteer work before graduation, not just to check a box, but to develop empathy and social responsibility. I created the Leadership Institute, a program where seniors worked on real projects with local government, nonprofits, and businesses. Students didn't just study leadership theory. They practiced leadership skills in actual situations. I established the Ethics Forum, monthly discussions where students, faculty, and community leaders explored moral dilemmas and ethical decision-making. Young people learned to think critically about right and wrong, not just what was legal or profitable. These programs attracted attention from educational experts nationwide. Riverside Academy became a model for character-based education. Other schools sent representatives to study our approach. "What Mrs. Stone has created at Riverside Academy represents the future of private education," wrote Dr. Jonathan Miller in Educational Leadership magazine. "Academic rigor combined with moral development produces graduates who don't just succeed professionally, but contribute meaningfully to society." But the real measure of success was in our graduates, young people who went on to careers in medicine, law, business, education, and public service. Alumni who remained connected to the school and continued supporting our mission. David was 8 years old when I became principal. He attended Riverside Academy throughout his education, benefiting from every program I developed. Small classes with master teachers. Individual attention when he struggled with mathematics. Leadership opportunities that built his confidence. Community service projects that taught him empathy. David received the kind of education most children never experience. Not because I was his mother, but because I'd built an institution capable of developing every student's potential. "Mom," David said at his high school graduation, "thank you for creating a place where I could grow into the person I want to be." That was 2011, 12 years ago. Back when David appreciated what I'd built. Before Vanessa convinced him that his mother's achievements were somehow embarrassing or irrelevant. My success at Riverside Academy opened other opportunities. I served on the State Board of Education for 6 years. I consulted with struggling schools throughout New England. I wrote articles about educational leadership for professional journals. In 2010, Connecticut Governor John Morrison appointed me to chair the State Commission on Educational Excellence, a blue ribbon panel tasked with developing recommendations for improving public education. Margaret Stone has demonstrated that high expectations and strong leadership can transform any educational institution, Governor Morrison said at the announcement ceremony. Her expertise will be invaluable in addressing our state's educational challenges. The Commission's report became the foundation for major educational reforms throughout Connecticut. Policies that improved outcomes for thousands of students across the state. These weren't just professional accomplishments. They were contributions to my community that created lasting positive impact. When I retired from Riverside Academy in 2022, the school held a celebration attended by over 500 people: alumni, faculty, community leaders, and state officials. Margaret Stone didn't just lead Riverside Academy, said current board chairman William Patterson. She created a legacy of excellence that will benefit students for generations to come. The school established the Margaret Stone Leadership Scholarship, a full tuition award for students who demonstrate academic ability and commitment to service. The endowment fund reached $2 million within 6 months of its creation. This is who I am. Someone who built something meaningful and lasting. Someone whose work improved thousands of lives over 3 decades. But my professional achievements weren't my only legacy. I'd also built a personal life of deep relationships and community connections. After David's father died in 2001, I could have retreated into grief and isolation. Instead, I threw myself into service and friendship. I joined the Riverside Community Foundation Board. Over 15 years, I helped raise over $10 million for local charities, scholarship programs, senior services, youth development initiatives. I became involved with the Women's Leadership Council of Connecticut, an organization that supports women pursuing careers in education, business, and public service. I volunteered with Meals on Wheels, delivering food to elderly residents who couldn't leave their homes. Every Thursday for 8 years, I spent 2 hours visiting people who needed both nutrition and companionship. These weren't obligations. They were relationships that enriched my life while helping others. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, one of my Meals on Wheels clients, became a dear friend. Eleanor was 89 years old, living alone after her husband's death. "Margaret," Eleanor told me one Thursday afternoon, "you're the highlight of my week. Not just because of the food, but because you treat me like I still matter." Eleanor died in 2018. At her funeral, her daughter approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Stone," she said, "my mother talked about you constantly. You gave her dignity and friendship during the loneliest years of her life." That's the person Vanessa chose to humiliate at her wedding. Someone who'd spent 70 years building relationships based on respect, service, and genuine care for others. Someone whose reputation in the community was built on integrity and accomplishment. Someone who had the connections, resources, and influence to fight back when she was disrespected. But Vanessa had made her calculation based on appearances rather than reality. She saw a 70-year-old woman and assumed weakness. She saw a mother-in-law and assumed subservience. She didn't see the former principal who'd managed budgets of millions of dollars. The community leader who'd navigated complex political relationships for decades. The woman who'd built her success through strategic thinking and careful planning. Vanessa thought she was dealing with someone who would accept humiliation quietly and fade into the background of her new marriage. She was about to learn that Margaret Stone was not that kind of woman. The woman walking out of that country club had spent 70 years earning respect through achievement and service. She'd built a network of relationships with some of the most influential people in Connecticut. She had resources Vanessa didn't know about, connections Vanessa couldn't imagine, and the strategic mind that had transformed a struggling school into a premier institution. Most importantly, she had something Vanessa clearly lacked: the moral authority that comes from a lifetime of treating others with dignity and respect. That moral authority was about to become a very powerful weapon. This is what Margaret Stone had built over 70 years. This is what Vanessa thought she could destroy with public humiliation and threats. She was spectacularly wrong. What happened at that wedding wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 18 months of increasingly hostile behavior that I'd been trying to ignore. The public humiliation was just Vanessa finally revealing her true character without pretense. Latai prescientis scacco prechment. Let me tell you how we got to that moment. Because understanding Vanessa's pattern of disrespect will help you see why what happened next was not just justified, but necessary. I first met Vanessa Chen in March 2022. David had been dating her for 3 months but hadn't brought her home yet. When he finally arranged for us to meet, I was excited to welcome someone new into our family. "Mom," David said when he called to arrange the meeting, "I really want you to meet Vanessa. She's special. I think you're gonna love her. Special." The way he said it told me this relationship was serious. David had dated other women over the years, but I'd never heard that tone of voice when he talked about them. We arranged to meet for Sunday brunch at the Riverside Inn, a casual, comfortable setting where we could have a relaxed conversation without pressure. I arrived 5 minutes early. David and Vanessa arrived 15 minutes late. "Sorry we're late," David said as they approached the table. Traffic was heavier than expected, but I'd noticed them sitting in the parking lot for 10 minutes before coming inside. Vanessa had been checking her appearance in the car mirror, reapplying lipstick, and apparently giving David instructions about something. "No problem at all," I said warmly. "I'm just excited to finally meet Vanessa." Vanessa was undeniably beautiful, petite, with long black hair and elegant features. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people spend on clothes in a month. Her jewelry was understated but clearly expensive. "Mrs. Stone," Vanessa said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "David has told me so much about you." Her smile was perfect. Her tone was polite. But something in her eyes suggested this meeting was an obligation rather than a pleasure. "Please call me Margaret," I said. "I'm so happy David found someone who makes him happy." We ordered brunch and began the getting-to-know-you conversation that happens when families meet for the first time. I asked about her background, her career, her interests. Vanessa worked as a marketing coordinator for a luxury fashion company in Hartford. She'd graduated from the University of Connecticut with a degree in communications. She enjoyed yoga, traveling, and fine dining, all perfectly reasonable answers, but delivered with a coolness that suggested she was checking boxes rather than sharing genuine information. "Yeah. What about family?" I asked. "David mentioned your parents live in California." "Yes," Vanessa replied. "My father is a surgeon. My mother was a college professor before she retired." "That's wonderful," I said. "What kind of medicine does your father practice?" "Cardiothoracic surgery," Vanessa said. Then, with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "He's quite successful, very well regarded in his field." The emphasis on success felt deliberate, as if she was establishing that her family's achievements were impressive compared to mine. "How exciting," I said genuinely. "It must be rewarding to save lives through such complex procedures." Vanessa's expression suggested she found my response inadequate somehow. Like I should have been more impressed by her father's status. The conversation continued, but I began noticing subtle signs of dismissiveness. When I mentioned my work at Riverside Academy, Vanessa's attentions seemed to wander. When David shared stories about his childhood, she checked her phone multiple times. Most telling was her reaction when David mentioned our family traditions. "Mom always makes her famous apple pie for Thanksgiving," David said with obvious affection. "It's been a tradition since I was little." "How nice," Vanessa said with the kind of tone people use when they're not really listening. "You'll have to try it this year," I said warmly. "I'd love to have you join us for Thanksgiving." "We'll see," Vanessa replied. "David and I might travel for the holidays. We've been discussing a trip to Napa Valley, travel instead of family time." That was her immediate response to an invitation to join our Thanksgiving celebration. David looked uncomfortable. "We haven't decided anything yet," he said quickly. But the message was clear. Vanessa had no interest in participating in our family traditions. She was already planning alternatives that excluded me. The brunch lasted 2 hours. By the end, I felt like I'd been interviewed rather than welcomed into a relationship. Vanessa had asked no questions about my interests, my life, or my relationship with David. She'd evaluated me based on some criteria I didn't understand and apparently found me lacking. After they left, I sat in my car for a few minutes processing what had just happened. The meeting hadn't gone badly exactly, but it hadn't gone well either. David called me that evening. "Mom, "What did you think of Vanessa?" he asked eagerly. This was a delicate moment. I could share my honest concerns, which might damage my relationship with David. Or I could be diplomatically positive and hope my first impressions were wrong. "She seems very polished," I said carefully. "Very put together." "She is," David agreed, "and she's incredibly smart. Her marketing campaigns have won awards. She's really accomplished." Accomplished. David was clearly impressed by Vanessa's professional success and social sophistication. "I'm glad you're happy," I said. "That's what matters most to me." "I think she was a little nervous about meeting you," David said. "She knows how important you are to me, and she wants to make a good impression." Nervous. That was a generous interpretation of what I had observed. But maybe David was right. Maybe Vanessa just needed time to feel comfortable with our family. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. That turned out to be a mistake. Over the next few months, David and Vanessa's relationship became more serious. They spent most weekends together. She began staying at his apartment regularly. He talked about her constantly, but I rarely saw her. When I invited them for dinner, Vanessa usually had other commitments. Work events. Social obligations. Yoga classes that couldn't be rescheduled. "She has a very busy social calendar," David explained when I asked if they'd like to join me for Easter dinner. "Of course," I said. "Maybe we can find another time that works better for her." But another time never materialized. Vanessa was always busy when I suggested getting together. The few times we did interact, her behavior became increasingly problematic. In June 2022, David graduated from law school. He'd been working toward his JD for 3 years while maintaining his full-time job. It was a significant achievement that represented enormous dedication and sacrifice. Ikasi. I was incredibly proud. I wanted to celebrate this milestone appropriately. "David," I said when he told me about his graduation ceremony, "I'd love to host a celebration dinner. Somewhere special. My treat." "That would be great, Mom," David said. "Let me check with Vanessa about her schedule." When David called back, he had a different tone. "Mom, Vanessa thinks a restaurant celebration might be too public. She's concerned about having a private moment to celebrate this achievement." Too public? As if celebrating my son's law degree was somehow inappropriate. "Of course," I said. "Would she prefer if I cooked dinner at home? Or if you celebrated just the two of you?" "Actually," David said hesitantly, "she's already made reservations at Le Bernardin in New York. She wants it to be really special." Le Bernardin. One of the most expensive restaurants in the country. A place where dinner for two costs more than most people spend on groceries in a month. "That sounds wonderful," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "You should definitely celebrate somewhere that special." But the message was clear. Vanessa had decided that her celebration was more appropriate than mine. Her taste was superior to mine. Her judgment about what was special trumped mine. David's graduation dinner happened without me. They posted photos on social media from their elegant evening in Manhattan. Beautiful food, expensive wine, intimate conversation. I celebrated my son's achievement by taking myself out for a quiet dinner and reflecting on how proud I was of his accomplishment. This pattern continued throughout the summer. Every time I tried to plan something with David, Vanessa had alternative suggestions that excluded me. I wanted to take David to see a Broadway show he'd mentioned wanting to see. Vanessa had already bought tickets for them to see a different show. I suggested a weekend trip to the family cabin in New Hampshire that David had always loved. Vanessa had planned a weekend getaway to Martha's Vineyard. I offered to host a barbecue for David's law school friends. Vanessa organized a cocktail party at an upscale wine bar instead. Each time, her alternative was more expensive, more exclusive, and more sophisticated than what I'd suggested. Each time, David chose her option over mine. "She has really good taste," David said when I commented on this pattern. "She knows about restaurants and entertainment options that I wouldn't think of." Good taste. As if my suggestions reflected poor taste rather than different preferences. By fall 2022, I understood that Vanessa was systematically removing me from David's social life. Not through direct confrontation, but through offering superior alternatives that made my ideas seem inadequate. She was training David to see her judgment as better than mine, her taste as more refined than mine, her social circle as more desirable than his family relationships. But the most troubling incident happened in October 2022. David called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual because he typically called on Sunday evenings. "Mom," he said, "I have something important to tell you." The tone made me nervous. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," David said quickly. "Actually, something wonderful happened. I proposed to Vanessa last weekend. She said yes. Engaged. My son was engaged to be married." "David, that's incredible news," I said, genuine happiness overwhelming my concerns about Vanessa. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Mom. I'm really excited." "Tell me everything," I said. "How did you propose? Where did it happen?" David described an elaborate proposal at a high-end resort in Vermont. He'd arranged for a private dinner on a mountaintop overlooking fall foliage. A photographer captured the moment from a hidden position. The ring was a custom design from a jeweler in New York. "It sounds absolutely perfect," I said. "She must have been thrilled." "She was," David said. "She said it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her." "I'm so happy for you both," I said. "When do you think you'll set the date?" "Actually," David said, "we've already started looking at venues. Vanessa wants to have the wedding next year. She's worried that if we wait too long, we won't be able to book the kind of venue she wants. Next year." They'd been engaged for less than a week, and were already rushing toward a wedding date. "That's exciting," I said. "Have you thought about what kind of ceremony you want?" "Vanessa has some very specific ideas," David said. "She's always dreamed of a certain type of wedding. Very elegant, very sophisticated. Vanessa's ideas. Vanessa's dreams. Not their shared vision, but her individual preferences. I'm sure whatever you decide will be beautiful," I said. "I can't wait to help with whatever you need." There was a pause on the phone, a hesitation that suggested this conversation was about to become more complicated. "Mom," David said carefully, "Vanessa and I talked about the wedding planning process. She's pretty organized and has strong opinions about how she wants things handled." Strong opinions. That was becoming a familiar phrase when David talked about Vanessa. "Of course," I said. "Most brides have specific visions for their wedding day." "Right," David said. "So we thought it might be better if she takes the lead on most of the planning. To avoid any confusion or conflicting ideas. Avoid confusion, as if my involvement would create problems rather than support." "David," I said gently, "I'm not trying to take over her wedding planning. I just want to help however I can." "I know, Mom, and we appreciate that. It's just that Vanessa is very detail-oriented, and she works better when she has complete control over the process." Complete control. The wedding planning would be entirely Vanessa's domain. My role would be to attend and approve whatever decisions she made. "I understand," I said. "Just let me know if there's anything I can do to support you both." "Actually," David said, "there is one thing. Vanessa was hoping you might be able to help with the venue. She's interested in some of the more exclusive locations, and she knows you have connections in the community." Connections. Vanessa wanted to use my relationships to secure advantages for her wedding, but she didn't want my input on any other aspects of the planning. "I'd be happy to make some calls," I said. "What kind of venue is she interested in?" "Something really elegant," David said. "Maybe a country club or historic estate. Somewhere that would create beautiful photos and impress our guests." Impress guests. The wedding was going to be a showcase for Vanessa's taste and social status. "I can definitely help with that," I said. "Let me make some inquiries and see what options might be available." That phone call led to my conversation with Harrison Whitfield and the booking of the Riverside Country Club, a favor that saved David and Vanessa thousands of dollars and gave them access to a venue they couldn't have secured otherwise. But Vanessa's reaction when I told them about the booking revealed her true attitude toward my contributions. "That's convenient," she said when David shared the news. Not "thank you" or "how wonderful" or "I'm so grateful," just convenient. As if I'd completed a minor task, rather than secured their dream venue through personal relationships built over decades. "Vanessa," David said, "Mom went out of her way to make this happen. The Riverside Country Club has a 2-year waiting list. I'm sure Mrs. Stone was happy to help." Vanessa replied with that same cool politeness I'd observed during our first meeting. Mrs. Stone. We'd been acquainted for 8 months, and she still refused to call me Margaret despite my repeated requests. The wedding planning process revealed more of Vanessa's character. She made every decision unilaterally, then informed David and me about her choices. She selected a photographer without consulting anyone. She chose a caterer based solely on price and presentation. She designed invitations that reflected her aesthetic preferences exclusively. When David mentioned that he might like to include some family traditions in the ceremony, Vanessa dismissed the idea immediately. "David, this is our wedding," she said. "We should create our own traditions instead of copying things from the past. Our wedding." But every decision reflected only her preferences, not their shared vision. The most revealing incident happened during menu planning. The caterer had prepared a tasting menu for David and Vanessa to sample potential dishes. "Would you like to include David's mother in the tasting?" the caterer asked. "Some families find it helpful to have input from someone with entertaining experience." "That won't be necessary," Vanessa said immediately. "David and I can handle the menu decisions ourselves." David looked uncertain. "Maybe Mom would enjoy being part of the tasting. She's hosted a lot of events over the years." "David," Vanessa said with barely concealed irritation, "we don't need your mother's approval for our food choices. This is our wedding, not a school fundraiser." "A school fundraiser?" That's how Vanessa characterized my 3 decades of experience organizing elegant events for sophisticated audiences. David didn't argue. He rarely argued with Vanessa about anything related to wedding planning, but I was beginning to understand the dynamic that was developing. Vanessa made decisions, David accepted them, and anyone who questioned her choices was dismissed as irrelevant. The guest list process was particularly painful. Vanessa created detailed spreadsheets categorizing potential invitees by their relationship to her and David. "We need to be strategic about guest selection," she told David during a conversation I overheard. "We want people who will add to the celebration, not people who will detract from the atmosphere we're trying to create. Add to the celebration?" As if some guests were more valuable than others, based on their social status or entertainment value. When David mentioned inviting some of his childhood friends, Vanessa objected. "Do we really need to invite people you haven't seen in years?" she asked. "I'd rather focus on current relationships that are actually relevant to our lives." Relevant to our lives. Vanessa was editing David's history, removing people who didn't fit her vision of their social circle. Some of David's oldest friends didn't receive invitations. People who'd been important to him throughout his childhood and adolescence were deemed irrelevant to his future. But every person on Vanessa's list was included, regardless of how briefly she'd known them, or how superficial their relationship might be. The same pattern applied to family invitations. Vanessa's extended family was invited in its entirety. Cousins she rarely spoke to, aunts and uncles from across the country, family friends she'd met only once or twice. But when David suggested inviting some of our more distant relatives, Vanessa questioned every name. "Do we really need your great-aunt from Colorado?" she asked. "We've never met her, and she probably wouldn't enjoy this type of event anyway." This type of event. As if our family members weren't sophisticated enough to appreciate Vanessa's carefully curated celebration. By spring 2023, the wedding had become entirely Vanessa's project. David was a supporting actor in her production rather than an equal partner in planning their celebration. And I had been relegated to the role of convenient resource. Someone who could provide connections or financial contributions when needed, but whose opinions and preferences were irrelevant to the actual decision-making process. The dress shopping incident in April 2023 crystallized everything wrong with this dynamic. Vanessa had been looking for her wedding dress for months. She'd visited boutiques in New York, Boston, and Connecticut. Nothing met her standards for elegance and uniqueness. "I want something that no one else will have," she told David. Something that reflects my personal style and makes a statement. A statement. The dress needed to communicate Vanessa's taste and sophistication to everyone at the wedding. When she finally found the dress at a boutique in Manhattan, there was a problem. The price was $8,000, which exceeded their dress budget by $3,000. "It's perfect," Vanessa told David after her appointment. "It's exactly what I've been looking for. But it's more expensive than we planned." David was clearly conflicted. He wanted Vanessa to have the dress she loved, but $8,000 represented a significant portion of their wedding budget. "Maybe we could look at some other options," he suggested hopefully. "Or see if there are similar styles at a lower price point." "David," Vanessa said with exasperation, "this is my wedding dress. This is something I'll have forever in our photos and memories. I don't want to compromise on something this important." That's when David called me. "Mom," he said, "I need to ask you about something, and I feel terrible asking." "What is it?" I said, already knowing this conversation was about money. David explained about the dress and the budget shortfall. He was embarrassed to ask for help, but desperate to make Vanessa happy. "She's found the perfect dress," he said. "But it's more than we budgeted. I hate to ask, but would you consider helping with the difference?" $3,000. A significant amount of money, but not beyond my means. More importantly, David rarely asked me for financial help. He'd been independent since college graduation and took pride in supporting himself. "Of course," I said immediately. "I want Vanessa to have the dress she loves." "Are you sure?" David asked. "I know it's a lot of money." "David, this is your wedding. I'm happy to contribute to making it special." I transferred the money to David's account that afternoon. $3,000 so that Vanessa could have her perfect dress. When David told Vanessa about my contribution, her response was revealing. "That's helpful," she said. Not "how generous" or "please thank your mother," just helpful. As if I'd performed a service rather than made a significant gift. But the most insulting part came later. When Vanessa posted photos of herself trying on the dress, she wrote a long caption about finding the perfect dress for my special day. No mention of how the dress was purchased. No acknowledgement of the contribution that made it possible. No gratitude for the gift that allowed her to have exactly what she wanted. $3,000 disappeared into Vanessa's narrative as if it had never existed. This pattern continued through every aspect of wedding planning. When financial challenges arose, I was expected to help solve them. When social connections were needed, I was expected to provide them. But when credit was given or gratitude expressed, my contributions disappeared. The flowers were beautiful arrangements that perfectly captured Vanessa's vision. Not arrangements donated by my friend Sarah at my request. The venue was an exclusive location that created the perfect atmosphere. Not a club booked through my professional relationships. The dress was exactly what Vanessa had always dreamed of wearing, not a dress purchased with my financial contribution. By the time we reached the wedding day, I understood that Vanessa saw me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. But I still believed that David would protect me from any serious disrespect. I still thought that whatever issues existed between Vanessa and me could be managed through diplomacy and patience. I was about to learn how completely wrong I was. What happened at that country club wasn't the beginning of a conflict. It was Vanessa finally revealing the contempt she'd been hiding for 18 months. And it was David finally choosing which relationship mattered more to him. The choice he made changed everything between us, forever. To understand why I refused to accept Vanessa's humiliation, you need to know where I came from. You need to understand the woman she chose to underestimate wasn't born with advantages or handed success on a silver platter. I was forged by struggle, shaped by adversity, strengthened by every obstacle life threw at me. My story begins in 1953 in Hartford, Connecticut. I was born Margaret Louise Murphy in a 2-room apartment above Kowalski's Bakery on Franklin Avenue. The building is gone now, demolished in the 1980s for urban renewal, but I remember everything about that place. The smell of fresh bread rising through the floorboards every morning at 4 a.m., the sound of delivery trucks rumbling past our windows before dawn, the thin walls that meant we heard every argument, every celebration, every crisis in the neighboring apartments. My father, Robert Murphy, worked as a mechanic at Sullivan's Garage on Asylum Street. When he had work, which wasn't always. In the 1950s, mechanics didn't have steady employment unless they owned their own shops. Robert worked for whoever needed help. Some weeks he earned decent money. Other weeks he came home empty-handed with oil-stained clothes and defeated shoulders. "Next week will be better, Helen," he'd tell my mother when the rent was due and his pockets were empty. Sullivan said he might have steady work if that contract comes through. Next week. Next month. Next year. My childhood was filled with promises of better times that never quite materialized. Hashom, my mother, Helen Murphy, cleaned houses for wealthy families in West Hartford. The kind of families who lived in colonial mansions with circular driveways, who had gardens maintained by professional landscapers, who threw dinner parties that cost more than we spent on groceries in 3 months. Helen took the bus to work every morning at 6 a.m. She scrubbed their toilets, washed their dishes, and organized their closets. She did their laundry, cleaned their windows, and polished their silver. For $8 a day. "Margaret," she'd tell me when I asked why she worked so hard for so little money, "this is what we have to do right now. But it won't be forever. You're going to have a different life. A different life." That became the foundation of everything I believed about my future. Helen Murphy had been forced to drop out of high school when her mother became ill with tuberculosis. She spent her teenage years caring for younger siblings and helping support her family. By the time circumstances allowed her to think about her own education, it was too late. She married my father at 17. They moved to Hartford because factory jobs were supposed to be plentiful. Instead, they found the same economic uncertainty that had driven them away from rural Connecticut. But Helen never stopped believing that education was the pathway to something better. "Look at this," she'd say, showing me pictures in Life magazine of college campuses and professional women. "See how they dress? See how they carry themselves? That's what education can do for a person." College seemed as impossible as flying to the moon, but Helen made me believe it was achievable if I worked hard enough. She bought me books from church rummage sales, Nancy Drew mysteries, biographies of famous women, anything that might expand my understanding of what was possible. She walked me to the Hartford Public Library every Saturday morning. We'd spend 2 hours browsing shelves filled with more books than I knew existed. Helen couldn't read well herself, but she understood that knowledge was power. "Take out as many books as they'll let you," she'd say. "Read everything, learn everything. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take away from you." Every evening after dinner, Helen would sit beside me at our kitchen table while I did homework. She couldn't help with the actual assignments, but she could provide encouragement and accountability. "Show me what you learned today," she'd say. Then she'd listen patiently as I explained math problems, or geography lessons, or science experiments. Beni, Mas Ati. Helen worked 6 days a week. She was exhausted most of the time. Her hands were permanently stained from cleaning chemicals. Her back ached from bending over other people's messes. But she never missed our evening homework sessions. "This is the most important work either of us will ever do," she'd tell me when I complained about difficult assignments. "Your education is our family's best investment." My younger brother Michael had different priorities. Mickey was charming and athletic, but couldn't sit still long enough to focus on schoolwork. "Why do we have to study so much?" Mickey would ask when Helen insisted on homework time. "Tommy Sullivan quit school and got a job at his dad's garage. He's making money right now instead of wasting time with books." Helen's response was always firm. "Tommy Sullivan will be fixing cars for the rest of his life. Margaret is going to do something that uses her mind instead of her hands." Mickey eventually dropped out of high school in his junior year. He got a job at a local construction company. Made decent money for a while. Married his girlfriend when they were both 19. By the time he was 25, Mickey had 2 children, a wife who resented their financial struggles, and the kind of backbreaking job that would leave him disabled before he turned 50. "I should have listened to Mom," Mickey told me years later when I was established in my career. "I should have stayed in school like you did. But Mickey's choices made Helen even more determined about my education. "See what happens when you don't have options?" she'd say after we heard about Mickey's latest job loss or financial crisis. "You become trapped by circumstances instead of controlling them." Bahia. Controlling circumstances. That became my philosophy for everything. Prosi. Elementary school was easy for me. I was naturally good at reading and mathematics. But more importantly, I understood that every grade, every test, every assignment was a step toward the future Helen envisioned. My teachers noticed my dedication quickly. Mrs. Patricia Williams, my fourth-grade teacher, was the first person outside my family to suggest that college might be possible. "Margaret has exceptional potential," Mrs. Williams told Helen during a parent conference. "With the right guidance and support, she could qualify for academic scholarships." Scholarships. The magical word that made college transform from impossible dream to achievable goal. Mrs. Williams spent her own time helping me develop study skills and academic habits. She recommended me for the gifted student program. She connected me with resources I didn't know existed. "Margaret," Mrs. Williams told me one afternoon after school, "you have the intelligence to succeed at anything you choose. But intelligence alone isn't enough. You need to develop the work ethic and persistence that will carry you through challenges." Work ethic and persistence. I was already learning those lessons at home, but Mrs. Williams helped me understand how to apply them strategically. Hefahestatiam, she taught me how to organize my time effectively, how to break large projects into manageable steps, how to seek help when I needed it without feeling ashamed of what I didn't know. Most importantly, she taught me that academic success was about more than memorizing information. It was about learning how to think critically and solve problems creatively. "Smart people don't just know things," Mrs. Williams explained. "They know how to figure things out." By middle school, I was consistently earning the highest grades in every subject. Not because learning came easily, but because I developed the discipline and strategies that made excellence possible. But academic success created new challenges. Some of my classmates resented my achievements. They accused me of showing off or trying to make them look bad. "Why do you have to be such a teacher's pet?" complained Janet Morrison, whose parents owned a successful insurance agency. "You make the rest of us look stupid." Janet's family had money and social status that mine lacked, but she couldn't compete with me academically, and that bothered her. "I'm not trying to make anyone look stupid," I told Janet. "I'm just doing my best." "Well, your best is annoying," Janet replied. These conflicts taught me an important lesson about human nature. Some people will resent your success regardless of how you achieve it. They'll try to make you feel guilty for working harder or achieving more than they do. With the law, I learned to ignore those people and focus on my goals. High school brought bigger challenges and bigger opportunities. Hartford Public High School in the 1960s was overcrowded and under-resourced. Many students dropped out before graduation. Those who stayed often had low expectations for their futures. But I had Mrs. Elizabeth Bennett, my sophomore English teacher, who changed everything about how I thought about my potential. Mrs. Bennett had graduated from Vassar College and earned a master's degree from Yale. She could have taught at any private school in Connecticut. Instead, she chose to work with students like me, who needed someone to believe in their abilities. "Margaret," Mrs. Bennett told me after reading one of my essays, "you write with clarity and insight that I rarely see in high school students. Have you thought about what you want to study in college?" College. Mrs. Bennett spoke about my college plans as if they were certain rather than hopeful. "I'm not sure my family can afford college," I said honestly. "Margaret," Mrs. Bennett said firmly, "smart students with strong academic records don't pay for college. Colleges pay them through scholarships and financial aid." That conversation opened my eyes to possibilities I hadn't understood. Mrs. Bennett explained how academic scholarships worked. She helped me research colleges that offered generous financial aid packages. She guided me through the application process that would determine my future. "You need to start thinking beyond just getting into college," Mrs. Bennet told me during my junior year. You need to think about what kind of career you want and what kind of impact you want to make. Career. Impact. These were new concepts for someone whose family lived paycheck to paycheck. Mrs. Bennet introduced me to biographies of successful women, educators, business leaders, politicians, scientists, women who'd used their intelligence and education to create meaningful careers. What do these women have in common? Mrs. Bennet asked after I'd read several biographies. I thought carefully before answering. They all found ways to help other people while building their own success. Exactly, Mrs. Bennet said. The most fulfilling careers combine personal achievement with service to others. Service to others. That idea resonated with something deep inside me. I didn't just want to escape my family's financial struggles. I wanted to create opportunities for other people to escape theirs. During my senior year, Mrs. Bennet helped me apply to 12 colleges. All schools that offered strong academic programs and generous financial aid packages. The application process was overwhelming. Essay questions about my goals and experiences. Recommendation letters from teachers. Standardized tests that would determine my academic future. But Mrs. Bennet guided me through every step. Margaret, she said as we worked on my personal essay, don't just tell colleges about your achievements. Tell them about your character. Help them understand what kind of person you are and what kind of contribution you'll make to their community. My personal essay focused on Helen's influence on my academic goals. I wrote about watching my mother work exhausting jobs to support our family, while never losing faith that education could create better opportunities. I want to build a career that honors my mother's sacrifices while creating opportunities for other young people to achieve their potential, I concluded. Education isn't just about personal success. It's about using knowledge and skills to make positive differences in other people's lives. The acceptance letters started arriving in March 1971. Connecticut College offered a full scholarship that covered tuition, room, board, and books. Wesleyan University offered a similar package. Even Yale University offered significant financial aid. I had choices. Real choices about my future that my parents never could have imagined. Helen cried when we opened the Connecticut College letter together. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride and relief. You did it, she whispered, holding the acceptance letter like it was made of gold. You're going to have the life I always dreamed of. That letter represented more than admission to college. It represented validation that hard work and persistence could overcome circumstances. That intelligence and determination were more powerful than money or social status. I chose Connecticut College because of their strong education program. I wanted to become a teacher. Someone who could provide the kind of guidance and encouragement that Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Bennet had given me. Moving to Connecticut College in September 1971 was like entering a different world. The campus was beautiful. Gothic stone buildings surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns. Libraries filled with more books than I'd seen in my entire life. My roommate was Patricia Whitman from Greenwich. Her father was a successful attorney. Her mother was active in charity organizations. Patricia had attended private schools her entire life and took her advantages completely for granted. What does your father do? Patricia asked during our first conversation. He's a mechanic, I said simply. Patricia's expression suggested she didn't know how to respond to that information. Most of her friends came from professional families. Doctors, lawyers, business executives. How interesting, Patricia said finally. The kind of response people give when they don't know what else to say. The cultural differences were obvious immediately. Patricia's clothes were beautiful and expensive. She talked casually about family vacations to Europe and ski trips to Vermont. Her biggest concern was choosing between multiple social opportunities. Min mode helfed, I had one presentable outfit for special occasions. I'd never been on an airplane. My biggest concern was maintaining the grades necessary to keep my scholarship. But those differences motivated rather than discouraged me. I wasn't intimidated by students who'd grown up with advantages. I was determined to prove that intelligence and hard work were more valuable than inherited privilege. My academic performance was excellent from the beginning. I earned A's in every course. I participated in every learning opportunity. I sought out professors who could mentor me and help me develop professionally. Dr. Margaret Foster, my education professor, became my most important mentor. Dr. Foster had built her career studying educational leadership and institutional development. Margaret, she told me during my sophomore year, "You have the vision and analytical skills to become an educational leader. Have you considered focusing on administration rather than classroom teaching?" Administration. I'd never thought about becoming a principal or superintendent, but Dr. Foster explained how educational administrators could impact hundreds or thousands of students, instead of just the 30 in a single classroom. Educational leaders create the systems and culture that make excellent teaching possible, Dr. Foster explained. They don't just educate individual students. They build institutions that educate students for generations. Building institutions. That concept excited me more than anything I'd studied. Dr. Foster helped me design an academic program that combined education courses with business and management training. She connected me with internship opportunities in school administration. She guided me toward graduate programs that would prepare me for leadership roles. "Margaret," Dr. Foster said during my senior year, "you have the potential to transform educational institutions. Don't settle for just being a good teacher. Prepare yourself to become a leader who creates opportunities for other good teachers to succeed." That advice shaped my decision to pursue a master's degree in educational administration. Another 2 years of education that would delay my entry into the workforce but prepare me for greater impact. Helen supported that decision completely. "One plea. Education is an investment," she said when I explained my graduate school plans. "The more you learn, the more you'll be able to accomplish." Graduate school at the University of Connecticut was challenging but rewarding. I studied organizational management, financial planning, curriculum development, and personnel administration. But more importantly, I gained practical experience through assistantships and internships. I worked with school principals and superintendents who showed me how educational institutions actually operated. "Margaret," said Dr. James Sullivan, the principal where I completed my administrative internship, "you understand something that many educators miss. Schools are complex organizations that require strategic thinking and effective management to achieve their educational mission." Strategic thinking, effective management. These became the foundations of my approach to educational leadership. Dr. Sullivan taught me that successful principals don't just supervise teachers and discipline students. They create vision and culture that inspire everyone in the building to pursue excellence. "The best educational leaders are builders," Dr. Sullivan explained. "They build systems, relationships, and culture that outlast their individual tenure. Building things that outlast your individual tenure. That became my definition of meaningful success. When I graduated with my master's degree in 1975, I had job offers from several school districts. I chose to start as an assistant principal in New Haven because the position offered opportunities to work with diverse student populations and develop innovative programs. New Haven was challenging. The school district served predominantly low-income students whose families faced the same economic pressures I remembered from childhood. Many of these students had academic potential, but lacked the support systems and encouragement necessary to achieve it. They needed someone who understood their circumstances and believed in their abilities. "These kids are capable of so much more than anyone expects," I told my principal, Dr. Robert Martinez, during my first year. "That's idealistic thinking, Margaret," Dr. Martinez replied. "We have to be realistic about what these students can achieve given their backgrounds." Realistic. That word always frustrated me. Realistic was usually code for low expectations and poor results. I spent 3 years in New Haven, proving that high expectations combined with adequate support produced extraordinary results. I developed tutoring programs, created enrichment opportunities, and established partnerships with local colleges and businesses. Test scores improved. College enrollment increased. Behavioral problems decreased. Most importantly, students began believing in their own potential. "Miss Murphy," said Carlos Rodriguez, one of my students who went on to become a doctor, "you made me think I could do anything. Nobody ever told me that before." That's what effective educators do. They help young people discover possibilities they didn't know existed. My success in New Haven led to the opportunity at Riverside Academy. a chance to build something exceptional from the ground up. But by then, my personal life had also changed dramatically. I'd met James Stone during my graduate program at UConn. James was studying for his MBA while working as a financial analyst. James came from a middle-class family in Hartford. His father was an accountant. His mother was a nurse. They'd provided stability and support, but not wealth or social status. Visual parade. I want to build something meaningful, James told me during one of our early conversations. Not just make money, but create something that makes a positive difference. Building something meaningful. That's what I wanted too. James and I married in 1977. We moved to Riverside, where I'd accepted the assistant principal position. James found work as a financial planner with a local firm. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable. More importantly, we shared the same values about hard work, service, and building something lasting. David was born in 1979. From the moment I held him, I was determined that he would have every opportunity to achieve his potential. But I also wanted him to understand that opportunities come with responsibilities. That success should be used to help others, not just benefit yourself. David, I told him when he was old enough to understand, you're going to have advantages that your grandmother and I never had. That means you have an obligation to use those advantages wisely. Using advantages wisely. That's what I thought I'd taught him. I thought I'd raised a son who understood the value of hard work and the importance of treating others with respect. I thought I'd modeled the kind of integrity and service that would guide his own life choices. I was wrong. The son I'd raised with such love and care chose to stand by silently while his wife publicly humiliated the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. But I wasn't the helpless little girl from Franklin Avenue anymore. I wasn't the scholarship student who felt intimidated by wealth and privilege. I was Margaret Stone, someone who'd built success through strategic thinking and unwavering determination. Someone who'd spent 70 years learning how to fight for what she believed in. Vanessa had just picked a fight with the wrong woman, and she was about to learn exactly what happened when you underestimated someone who'd spent a lifetime turning obstacles into opportunities. Wooly. Now you understand who I really am. You know the woman Vanessa chose to humiliate in front of 200 guests. Someone who'd built her entire life on the principle that respect must be earned and dignity must be defended. She was about to learn that Margaret Stone was not someone who accepted defeat gracefully. While Vanessa and David were cutting their wedding cake and posing for photos, I was sitting in my car in the country club parking lot, making the most important phone calls of my life. Vidoi David when Miss 6's trice on Vidoi and Miss 6 tribe. My first call was to Harrison Whitfield III, the man whose favor had secured their dream venue. Harrison, I said when he answered, I need to ask you about the Riverside Country Club booking I arranged for David's wedding. Of course, Margaret, Harrison said warmly. I hope everything went smoothly today. The club staff mentioned it was a beautiful celebration. Harrison, I need you to understand what happened at that celebration, I said. And I need to ask you to help me with something. I told Harrison about Vanessa's public humiliation, about being ordered to leave my own son's wedding, about David's failure to defend me when his wife threatened to have security remove me. Harrison was silent for a long moment. Margaret, he finally said, that's absolutely unconscionable. After everything you did to make that wedding possible. I need to know something, I said. Does the club have security cameras in the areas where the confrontation happened? They have comprehensive security coverage, Harrison confirmed. All public areas are recorded for liability purposes. Harrison, I'm going to need copies of those recordings as evidence of what actually happened today. Margaret, you'll have them Monday morning, Harrison said without hesitation. And Margaret, I'm appalled by how you were treated, especially after the favor you did for those young people. Harrison understood exactly what Vanessa had done. She'd used my connections to secure advantages for her wedding, then publicly humiliated the person who'd made those advantages possible. My second call was to Sarah Matthews, the florist who donated $3,000 worth of arrangements. Sarah, I said, I need you to know what happened at David's wedding today. Sarah listened in growing disbelief as I described Vanessa's behavior. Margaret, I'm horrified, Sarah said. Those flowers were my gift to you and your family. If I'd known how that young woman would treat you, I never would have donated them. Sarah, I need to ask you for something. I need a detailed invoice showing the retail value of everything you provided for the wedding. Of course, Sarah said immediately. And Margaret, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You deserved so much better. A detailed invoice. Documentation of exactly how much Vanessa's perfect wedding had depended on generosity she'd never acknowledged. My third call was to Jennifer Walsh, the wedding coordinator who'd witnessed the entire confrontation. Mrs. Stone, Jennifer said when I reached her, I'm so sorry about what happened today. In 15 years of coordinating weddings, I've never seen anything like that. Jennifer, I need to ask if you'd be willing to provide a written statement about what you observed. Absolutely, Jennifer said. Mrs. Stone, what that bride did was completely unacceptable, especially after how gracious and helpful you were throughout the planning process. A written statement from a professional wedding coordinator, someone with no personal investment in the situation, who could testify to exactly what had happened. My fourth call was to Dr. Patricia Chen, my longtime physician and friend. Patricia, I said, I need medical documentation of my mental and physical competence today. I suspect there may be attempts to claim I was confused or impaired when I make the decisions I'm about to make. Margaret, what's going on? Patricia asked with concern. I explained the situation briefly. I'll have complete medical and cognitive assessments on your record by Monday, Patricia said firmly. Margaret, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Medical documentation of my complete competence. Protection against any future claims that grief or stress had impaired my judgment. My fifth and most important call was to Richard Morrison, my attorney. Richard, I need you to meet me at my house tonight. We're going to be making some significant changes to legal documents. Margaret, what's happened? Richard asked. My son and his wife have shown me exactly where I stand in their priorities, I said. Now I'm going to show them where they stand in mine. Richard arrived at my house at 9 p.m. He brought his laptop and a briefcase full of legal documents. Tell me everything, Richard said as he sat up at my dining room table. I walked him through the entire 18 months of disrespect. Vanessa's systematic exclusion of me from David's life. Her use of my resources without acknowledgement. The wedding planning process that treated me like hired help. And finally, the public humiliation that had ended our relationship forever. Margaret, Richard said when I finished, what you're describing is a pattern of emotional abuse and exploitation. What do you want to do about it? I want to remove them from my will entirely, I said. Both of them. Every asset, every account, every inheritance they thought they could count on. Richard took notes as I outlined my new estate plan. The house would go to the Riverside Historical Society, to be maintained as a museum showcasing educational leadership and community service. My investment accounts would fund the Margaret Stone Scholarship for students from low-income families pursuing careers in education. My personal belongings would be donated to various charities. David and Vanessa would receive nothing. Are you sure about this, Margaret? Richard asked. This is a permanent decision that can't be easily reversed. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. They've shown me who they really are. I'm simply responding accordingly. Richard drafted the new will that night. Every page removed David and Vanessa from my legacy. Every provision redirected my life's work toward people who would appreciate it. There's one more thing, I said as Richard prepared the final documents. I want to record a video message explaining my decisions, something they can watch after I'm gone to understand exactly why this happened. Richard set up his laptop to record as I looked directly into the camera. David, I said, if you're watching this, it means I've died and you've just learned that you inherited nothing from the woman who gave you everything. You're probably shocked, confused, maybe even angry. Let me explain why this happened. For 18 months, you allowed your wife to disrespect me systematically. You stood by while she used my connections and resources for her benefit, then dismissed me as irrelevant to your lives. At your wedding, she publicly humiliated me in front of people I've known for decades. She threatened to have security remove me from my own son's wedding. And you chose her side. You chose to protect the woman who was destroying me rather than defend the woman who'd sacrificed everything for you. That choice revealed who you really are. And who you really are is not someone who deserves to inherit a lifetime of my achievements. Everything I built is now helping young people escape poverty through education. The same opportunity that transformed my life 70 years ago. My legacy is making the world better, which is what I always intended. I just thought you would be part of that legacy instead of the reason for this decision. I hope someday you understand that love and respect cannot be taken for granted. That family relationships require mutual consideration, not one-sided exploitation. I hope you learn that actions have consequences, and some consequences are permanent. Goodbye, David. You had the opportunity to inherit something beautiful. You chose poorly. Richard sealed the video message in an envelope to be opened only after my death. Margaret, he said as he packed up his documents, I've been practicing law for 25 years. I've seen families destroyed by greed and entitlement, but I've rarely seen someone handle betrayal with as much dignity and strategic thinking as you've shown tonight. Dignity and strategic thinking. The same qualities that had built my career were now protecting my legacy. But legal documents were only the beginning of my response. Over the next week, I began implementing a more immediate form of consequences. I called Timothy Whitfield, Harrison's son who ran the family investment firm. Timothy, I said, David and Vanessa will probably be looking for investment advice now that they're married. I want you to know they're not the kind of clients your firm wants to work with. I explained what had happened at the wedding. Mrs. Stone, Timothy said, I'm appalled. After everything you did for my family, don't worry, they won't be getting any investment services from Whitfield Capital. I called Dr. Elizabeth Harper, my former professor, who now served on the board of several nonprofit organizations. Elizabeth, I said, David and Vanessa may apply for positions or board appointments with organizations you're involved with. I want you to understand their character before you consider them. Elizabeth was horrified by my account of the wedding. Margaret, they'll find no support from any organization I'm associated with, she promised. I called Maria Santos, the director of the Hartford Community Foundation, where I'd served on the board for 15 years. Maria, I said, I need you to know that David Stone and Vanessa Chen are not people who should be considered for any foundation activities or funding opportunities. Maria understood immediately. Margaret, your character reference means everything to this foundation. They won't be welcome here. One by one, I contacted every professional and personal connection I'd built over 40 years. Bank presidents, school superintendents, business leaders, nonprofit directors. All people who respected my judgment and valued our relationships. All people who would remember that Margaret Stone had been publicly humiliated by two young people who'd used her connections for their own benefit. Within a week, David and Vanessa would discover that their social and professional options in Connecticut had suddenly become very limited. But the most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the wedding, I received a phone call from Dr. Robert Chen, Vanessa's father. Mrs. Stone, he said, I need to apologize for my daughter's behavior at the wedding. Dr. Chen had heard about the confrontation from other guests who'd witnessed it. What Vanessa did was inexcusable, he continued. Linda and I are mortified by her actions. Dr. Chen, I appreciate your call, I said, but this is between Vanessa and me. No, Mrs. Stone, it's not. Vanessa's behavior reflects on our entire family, and it violates every value we tried to teach her. Dr. Chen explained that he and his wife had decided to have a serious conversation with Vanessa about her treatment of me. She will be apologizing to you personally, Dr. Chen said, and she will be making some changes in how she approaches family relationships. 2 days later, Vanessa called me. Mrs. Stone, she said, her voice shaking slightly, my parents want me to apologize for what happened at the wedding. Her parents want her to apologize, not because she understood what she'd done wrong, but because she'd been ordered to make the call. Vanessa, I said calmly, is this your apology or your parents' apology? There was a long pause. I'm sorry if you felt disrespected, Vanessa finally said. If I felt disrespected. The classic non-apology that takes no responsibility for actual wrongdoing. Vanessa, I said, let me be very clear about something. You didn't just disrespect me. You publicly humiliated me after using my connections and resources to create your perfect wedding. I was stressed about everything being perfect, Vanessa said defensively. Stress doesn't excuse cruelty, I replied. And it doesn't justify threatening to have someone's mother removed from their son's wedding. Maybe I overreacted, Vanessa admitted reluctantly. Maybe. Overreacted? Still no real acknowledgement of what she'd actually done. Vanessa, I said, your apology tells me everything I need to know about your character. We won't be speaking again. I hung up the phone. Vanessa had been given the opportunity to take genuine responsibility for her actions, to show real remorse and request forgiveness. Instead, she'd offered the minimum apology necessary to satisfy her parents' demands. Some people never learn that actions have consequences until those consequences become permanent. 6 months later, the full impact of my decisions became clear. David called me for the first time since the wedding. Mom, he said, we need to talk. About what? I asked. About what's been happening since the wedding, David said. People have been treating us differently. Vanessa can't get the job she wanted. I've been passed over for opportunities I should have gotten. What kind of opportunities? I asked. Partnership track at my law firm. Board positions with nonprofit organizations. Even social invitations have dried up. David was discovering that reputation and relationships matter in professional communities. That word travels quickly when someone behaves badly toward a respected community member. I think people are avoiding us because of what happened at the wedding, David continued. What do you think happened at the wedding? I asked. There was some kind of misunderstanding between you and Vanessa, David said carefully. Misunderstanding. Even now, he couldn't acknowledge what had actually occurred. David, I said, there was no misunderstanding. Your wife publicly humiliated me and threatened to have me removed from your wedding. You chose to support her behavior instead of defending me. Mom, you're exaggerating what happened, David said. It wasn't that serious. Not that serious. His wife's public cruelty toward his mother wasn't serious enough to warrant consequences. David, I said, I have security camera footage of the entire confrontation. I have witness statements from multiple guests. I have documentation of everything that happened. There was silence on the phone. The reason people are treating you differently is because they understand what kind of people you really are, I continued. And they're making their own decisions about whether they want to associate with you. Mom, can't we work this out? David asked desperately. Can't we put this behind us and move forward? Put it behind us. Pretend it never happened. Accept his wife's cruelty and continue our relationship as if nothing had changed. David, I said, some things can't be worked out. Some behavior is unforgivable. Some choices are permanent. What do you mean? David asked. I mean, you chose Vanessa's side when she humiliated me publicly. Now you live with that choice. Are you saying you're cutting us out of your life? David asked. I'm saying you cut yourselves out of my life when you showed me exactly how little I matter to you. Mom, that's not fair, David protested. What's not fair is using someone's love and generosity for 18 months, then treating them like garbage when it's convenient. We never treated you like garbage, David said. David, your wife called me a pathetic old woman and threatened to have security remove me from your wedding. You supported her actions. If that's not treating someone like garbage, what is? David couldn't answer. Mom, we need your help, he finally said. Things are getting difficult for us professionally and socially. People respect you in this community. If you would just tell people that everything is fine between us. Help. After everything they'd done, David wanted me to use my reputation to repair the damage they'd caused to their own standing. David, I said, you want me to lie to protect the people who humiliated me publicly? I want you to help your family, David said. My family, I said? When I was fighting for my dignity at your wedding, was I your family then? When Vanessa was calling me pathetic, was I your family then? Mom, please, David said desperately. David, I spent 30 years building relationships in this community based on integrity and respect. I'm not going to destroy my reputation by vouching for people who've shown they don't deserve respect. So you're just going to destroy our lives? David asked angrily. I'm not destroying anything, I said calmly. I'm simply telling the truth when people ask about what happened. The consequences you're experiencing are the natural result of your own behavior. This is ridiculous, David said. You're ruining our futures over one argument at a wedding. One argument. That's how he characterized his wife's public humiliation of his mother. David, I said. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just no longer protecting you from the consequences of your choices. What does that mean? David asked. It means when people ask me about your character, I tell them the truth. When organizations consider you for positions, I don't provide positive recommendations. When social events are being planned, I don't suggest including you. You're sabotaging us, David accused. I'm being honest about who you are, I replied. If honesty sabotages you, that says something about your behavior, not mine. That was our last conversation. David never called again. He never acknowledged what he'd done wrong. He never took responsibility for choosing his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity. Instead, he and Vanessa left Connecticut. They moved to North Carolina, where my reputation and relationships couldn't affect their opportunities. Nong. They discovered what life was like without family support, without professional connections, without the safety net I'd provided for David his entire life. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their marriage struggled under financial and social pressures, that Vanessa blamed David for their difficulties, that David regretted how things had ended between us. But regret isn't the same as understanding, and understanding isn't the same as accepting responsibility. Some people never learn that relationships require mutual respect, that love can't survive one-sided exploitation, that actions have consequences that outlast momentary satisfaction. 2 years after the wedding, I received word that David and Vanessa had divorced. She'd left him for someone with better financial prospects and social connections. David found himself completely alone. No wife, no mother, no family support system. He'd chosen Vanessa over me, then Vanessa chose someone else over him. I felt no satisfaction in his pain. But I felt no obligation to rescue him from consequences he'd created. Today I'm 72 years old. I live independently in my beautiful home. I'm surrounded by friends who respect me and organizations that value my contributions. Wastafing and my contributions. I volunteer with educational nonprofits. I mentor young principals who are building their careers. I serve on scholarship committees that help students from low-income families pursue their dreams. My life is meaningful and fulfilling, filled with relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. Most importantly, I'm free from the burden of loving people who saw my love as weakness rather than strength. The Margaret Stone Scholarship has already helped 43 students attend college. Young people like I was 50 years ago, who needed financial assistance to escape difficult circumstances through education. These students send me thank you letters that remind me why building something lasting matters more than preserving relationships with people who don't appreciate what they've been given. Mrs. Stone, wrote Maria Rodriguez, one of our scholarship recipients, your generosity changed my entire life. I am the first person in my family to attend college, and I'll be graduating next month with a degree in elementary education. Thank you for believing in students like me. That's what real legacy looks like. Not money passed down to ungrateful family members, but opportunities created for people who understand their value. My house will become a museum that tells the story of how educational leadership can transform communities. Visitors will learn about the importance of hard work, integrity, and service to others. Mayans. Everything I built will continue making positive differences long after I'm gone. As for David and Vanessa, they learned that humiliating someone publicly has consequences, that using people's generosity without gratitude eventually backfires. That respect must be earned and can be lost through poor choices. They thought they were dealing with a weak old woman who would accept mistreatment quietly, someone who could be used when convenient and dismissed when inconvenient. They discovered that Margaret Stone was not that kind of woman. The text message that inspired this story was Vanessa telling me to get out of her wedding. My response, delivered through years of consequences, was simple. Actions have permanent consequences. Choose wisely. Sometimes karma isn't immediate or dramatic. Sometimes it's patient and strategic. Sometimes it looks like a 70-year-old woman who refuses to be anyone's victim. Sometimes it looks like someone who built her success through determination and won't let anyone destroy what she's created. My name is Margaret Stone. I turned obstacles into opportunities. I transformed institutions. I changed lives. Meine Faust. And when two people tried to humiliate me publicly, I reminded them exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who spent a lifetime earning respect. The woman they dismissed as pathetic taught them that dignity is not negotiable, that family loyalty works both ways, that some choices are permanent. I sleep peacefully knowing that everything I built continues serving positive purposes, making the world better through education, service, and opportunity. Which is what I always intended. Posachami dratas pro posachami rather al wapasaing gombo pro posachami zatin. I just thought David would be part of that legacy instead of a cautionary tale about what happens when you forget where your blessings came from. Posachami intimi. But some lessons can only be learned through loss, and some consequences last a lifetime. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.